Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another Canadian federal election forecast. So, we're starting to maybe see some overall movement here. The Conservatives have pulled ahead just ever so slightly in seat total. They're slightly gaining again in popular vote share. And if you look at raw polling numbers, they've had a lot of very good polls recently. Just to name three, they've had Main Street, a Nanos, and an Ipsos poll in the last month at 37% support. That is very good. That is the upper end of the numbers they have seen since things stabilized in December. And we seem to be on a general upward trend here. Because on the other side, we are seeing the Liberals poll mediocrely, 30-29 range. Some of the lowest they've ever polled. Now, you might say to yourself, but they're at 32 now in your model. How can that be if they're polling at 29 or 30? Well, my model does forecast polling mistakes, strategic voting, and historical trends. Historically, the Liberals usually outperform polling, likely because of NDP to Liberal strategic voters who make up their minds in the ballot box. So they do get a slight edge here. But that doesn't really hurt them. Change the story here, sorry. The Conservatives seem to be gaining again. Now, I will caution, this isn't even their best performance yet, the Conservatives. Let's just keep making this a bit bigger here. As you can see, back in June, they had a 10-seat lead, and now they're only down to 5. Though there was some exceptions you can see in popular votes here. The Liberals are a whole percentage point lower, particularly in places like Atlantic. No, wait, where were they down in the seats here? Oh, yeah. Quebec and Ontario is where they're mostly losing their seats, where they currently have them, and that just wasn't really a thing. Wasn't likely to be stable. It could happen, for sure. And I suspect maybe closer to Election Day, we will see the Conservatives gain more substantial ground in Ontario. But at this point, if you look at Ontario, the Conservatives are getting pretty close to maxed out in their comfortable we should win seats. Now, if you watched my Path to Victory series, you will have more details on this. But in essence, we can really only expect Sudbury, London West, St. Catharines, and a couple of these GTA seats. Those are what we would expect to go Conservative if they continue gaining some ground. And that's what, 5? 6? There's 6 more there. It's like there's room to grow, by all means. But it's getting closer and closer. And yes, there are other seats such as outskirts of Hamilton or Pickering, Oxbridge, or this riding I can't think of the name of. What is it? Glengarry, Prescott, Russell. Like, there's a couple more you could look at. But you start getting into sweep territory then. Again, it's not impossible, and I think some of these are probably likely, but you can't really expect all of them. That makes sense. We'd be looking at really a major Liberal collapse then, if that happens. But that's not to say the current numbers aren't good for the Conservatives. If we go notably to BC, what we're seeing is, once again, this is not the first time, and it probably won't be the last time, because it'll probably swing about a bit, because BC is one of the more chaotic areas to poll. but most of coastal BC has swung conservative. North Island, Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, etc. Courtenay, Alberni swung conservative. Cowichan, Malahat, Langford is currently just lean NDP. Tilt NDP, I should say. But a lot of these have moved. And again, Cowichan, Malahat, Langford is close. It's not very unreasonable to think that the Conservatives, in a good election campaign with good turnout, could sweep the entire coast, leaving the left in BC to just Victoria and Greater Vancouver itself. And we could easily see a similar thing happen in Northern Ontario. It's not plausible to assume that Churchill, Kiewit, ASCII could also go the same way, especially now. I'm not including this poll for various reasons I broke down on Twitter, but basically none of the regionals make any sense, so I don't trust the poll itself. But there was a Polara poll today, and that poll had the Conservatives doing quite well with the Indigenous population. They were doing about 31% with 32% support in the poll, so very strongly. If we see something like that and we see other strong numbers, we could potentially see that riding flip. One of the strongest voting blocks for the NDP, there are the Indigenous groups, different reservations and all that vote strongly NDP. If they flip, or they even just break even NDP Conservative, that would flip the riding quite handily. And at this point, you're kind of seeing a potential picture here. It seems reasonably possible that this might be, if not Singh's last election, it might be the last election of the NDP being a serious party. They are at very high risk of losing every seat that's not inside a city. Only Nunavut might survive, and that's mostly because of local factors of the incumbent and that. But that is quite substantial. And even in some of these cities, if you look at Victoria itself, both of the ridings in Victoria are not safe by any means. Now, I don't think it's likely that the NDP would lose them going into this election, but there's reason to believe they could if it goes poorly. The world where the NDP finishes with 10 seats in 2025 is not that implausible at this point. We are seeing this trend over and over again, mostly in BC, where the NDP are doing poorly and the Conservatives are starting to do very well. Just look here. One of the biggest moves since May. We've had 28.1 down to 25.9 for the NDP, and the Conservatives in turn have gained a whole point. That is substantial. Now, maybe, potentially, this is noise, because the Liberals have also gained a bunch of ground. Maybe the Liberals and the NDP are just trading voters. That could be happening. Again, if you look, last update to this one, we see about 0.7 reduction in the NDP and about 0.6 gain the Liberals. So maybe they're just trading voters back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Maybe. But that's still not good for the NDP. Even if they can pull out 17, or maybe they're a bit more lucky and they can pull out 20, that is still going to be a decisive hit to the NDP. We are talking about a party that could lose easily 20% of its seats, up to 60% of their seats, depending on performance. And a lot of the remaining seats are extremely hyper concentrated, but it's unlikely that they would continue without the incumbent. You look at the ones in Winnipeg. In the current party system, if those were open seats and the NDP was decimated after 2025 down to 10 seats, I think the Liberals have a very solid chance of winning those seats in turn. Especially Transcona Elmsdale, Transcona, I think that's the name, where the Conservatives have, Elmwood Transcona, where the Conservatives have a non-zero, though albeit extremely unlikely, chance of winning that seat with a strong performance in Manitoba and or Winnipeg. Now, this is by no means saying the Conservatives will or should win that seat, just like how the Conservatives really had no chance of winning Winnipeg South Centre, no matter what certain pundits might have you believe. It really wasn't likely, but it doesn't have to be certain. If it's an open race and there's a strong Conservative performance, the Liberals could win out of a strategic voting. And once they win, they will probably continue to keep winning, as long as the Liberal Party stays where it is. Obviously, if the Liberal Party massively changes, that will change. But it seems to be going this direction under Trudeau. And I do not think the NDP's weak performance since 2021 should be a surprise. Trudeau has made a conscious decision to shift left. Now, he's been doing that since 2019 at least, if not before then. But he's made this conscious decision. One of the biggest weaknesses of the Liberals for the longest time is NDP Liberal vote splits giving Conservative seats. Now, if you know anything about elections or election systems, you have probably heard of the phrase / term Diverger's Law. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but you get me. The idea and principle of this law is that in first past the post, the system will trend to two parties. Now, some people confuse this, and they will look at Canada and be like, oh, look, there is 5 parties on the scoreboard, therefore the Diverger's Law is wrong. That's not what this means. It trends to this. At any given point in time, it might not be that, but it tries to find a two-party system. And in a lot of ways, we actually have that in every province, for the most part. Only Ontario is really distinct. In Quebec, it's a one-party system. There's all sorts of different small splintered opposition groups, but they're not at all remotely unified, and many of them would probably coalition with the CAQ over each other. For example, the Parti Québécois will almost certainly coalition with the CAQ before the Liberals. So what does that mean here? Well, it seems to me that Trudeau's team in the Liberal Party are trying to Diverger's Law the NDP. That appears to be what's happening. And the Conservatives under Poilievre are doing the same thing. Now, this happened in reverse under Harper, where both Jack Layton and Harper were trying to do this to the Liberals. And they almost succeeded, if not for Trudeau. And I think Trudeau knows that. And as the son of probably the most famous Liberal today, a man that the Liberal Party's current identity is basically built around, or at least off of, I think Trudeau doesn't want to risk that ever happening again. So it seems like to me he is trying to crush the NDP, and Singh is happily playing along with this. That is one of the reasons I suspect why the Liberals joined the confidence and supply agreement. I don't think Singh ever would have voted non-confidence for the Liberals without the agreement. That would not have happened. Singh has no political acumen and he has no courage. There's no way he would torpedo a Liberal government without the CASA. So why would the Liberals sign a CASA then? Simple. In a first-past-the-post election system, a supply and confidence agreement usually crushes the smaller party. The reason for this is the smaller party gets all of the blame and none of the credit. And they have very good reason why that's the case. This isn't capricious from voters. This isn't voters being stupid. It makes perfect sense. If you are looking at something like dental care, and you want to give someone credit for dental care, who are you going to credit? The party that has 160 seats who were doing it, or the small, tiny party with 25 seats? You're going to credit the bigger one because they're the ones who did it. The NDP could not do it without the Liberals. And maybe you could argue the NDP forced it. Maybe. But that's not very convincing to people. Because at the end of the day, if the Liberals didn't want to do it, what were the NDP going to do? Call their bluff? Force an election? No one believes Singh's going to force an election. And even if he did, up until recently, would have returned a very similar result. At the time of signing the CASA, it would have returned the same result, plus or minus some seats. There was no reason to believe it would be manifestly different. We can go all the way back here, before I even started tracking seats, unfortunately. But like July 17th, it was Liberal 7-seat lead. This would not be a majority with NDP support, but it'd be very, very close. And if you go even further back, if you go to April, the Liberals have a vote lead. Popular vote lead. Notably, they have very strong performance in Ontario. They have solid performance in Manitoba. They have a great performance in BC. They're doing fantastic in Atlantic. Fantastic in Quebec. I don't have the seats for this projection, but this would likely have been in the realm of 150 to 160 Liberal seats again. It might even be an outright Liberal majority. At this point. So that's kind of the shtick here. I think, now I don't have the data for this because we don't actually know who proposed it and who did it, whose idea it was. But I have a very strong suspicion that Trudeau wanted the CASA because he wants to crush the NDP. The NDP are nothing but a threat to the Liberals. They disrupt the ability for the Liberals to claim we are the progressive party by being more progressive than them. But the NDP are unproductively progressive. There's no way the NDP could reasonably and meaningfully win an election in a head-to-head with the Conservatives. 2011 isn't actually surprising. This is not idle speculation. I've done maps for this before. Now, this is old. It's from, I think, January, February, so older color schemes and conventions. But this is an idea. If we remove the Liberals and we redistribute their voters based on second choice data that we know exists, based off of the Canadian Election Survey. So, existing second choice data. This is what we get. This is a comfortable Conservative majority. And at no point has the normal scenario been a Conservative majority. Let's go back to this. We go back to February of last year. Or wait, 2023, not last year, this year. We have a Liberal lead of 8 seats. We have a Conservative majority without the Liberals. That's the thing. If we delete the NDP from existence, though, and we rerun the same thing with the same math and the same ideas, we get a comfortable Liberal majority instead. The Liberal vote is massively and significantly more efficient because they have They have a less toxic brand among wealthy suburbanites than the NDP does. Let's put these side by side here so you can really see the difference. Notice how the GTA votes. Mississauga, Etobicoke, York, solidly blue. Brampton is only barely orange. In this scenario, without the NDP, the Liberals comfortably win all of it. Same thing in the lower mainland of BC. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. They win comfortably all of it with only a few ridings that are somewhat close. Conversely, sure, the NDP win most of the mainland BC, but they do 3 seats worse, and there's 2 that they are at risk of losing, whereas there's 1 that the Conservatives are at risk of losing in the opposite. You look at the coast of BC. That's not what I meant to say. You look at places like Atlantic Canada. Wrong coast in my brain. Atlantic Canada under the NDP, the Conservatives win all of it because the Liberal brand is a bonus in Atlantic Canada. The NDP brand is a negative. Just as an example of a Nova Scotian, I know many orange Liberal types who, following the 2009 to 2013 NDP government in Nova Scotia, will have decided to never vote NDP ever again because that government was so bad. And everything basically got worse. That's the big issue. And the rest of the Atlantic provinces, the NDP, are basically dead. You look at PEI or New Brunswick, the NDP's 4th place. Newfoundland, it's a footnote. It's basically a 2-party system in Newfoundland at this point. So I suspect this is what is happening. At least what Trudeau wants to be happening. Will it actually be like this in practice? I don't think so. I don't think either. Well, this scenario I think is possible if the Liberals die. I don't think this is what the map would actually look like if the NDP died. Now, the math worked out this way, but I think what would happen is a lot of Liberal voters, centrist types, blue Liberals, would probably leave the electorate or vote Conservative if the Liberals moved this left. I'm leaning more to leave the electorate. I think the turnout would be very low in this scenario. In which case, it becomes a lot closer. But sometimes you see people say a different one, a third scenario here, where the 2 parties merge. And this is by far the worst one. This is the worst one, because now you don't have the history and the branding of the Liberal Party buoying it. And you don't... this is a terrible scenario. Shouldn't do this. I mean, maybe you should. This is honestly what I would say to people when they say, oh, Canada would be so left-wing in the U.S. Like, maybe initially, sure. First election, maybe first 2 elections. But when you put a 2-party system on it and you force the 2-party system on it, it will adapt to it. There's no such thing as a country that has a 2-party system, or first past the post, I should say, where you actually only ever have a 2-party system. Now, you might remember, I just said, but Quebec currently has a 1-party system. Right, because there is actually a Diverger's Law moment going on in Quebec among the left nationalists. Because what people mistake about Quebec, you see this occasionally pop up in punditry or in the news, that, support for independence is so low, therefore we've crushed the scourge of Quebec separatism. No, we haven't. Quebec separatism won. They have absolutely won. The caveat is, they have won by acknowledging to their voters that, no, we won't actually leave Quebec until we are or leave Canada until our finances are good, effectively. That's what the CAQ is. But you look in Quebec right now, Parti Québécois, CAQ, Quebec Solidaire are all separatist nationalist parties. And they collectively get close to 80% of the vote. And about 80% of Quebec are what you would call Québécois. And I use that distinction from Quebecer because because Québécois is an ethnic group, not a nationality. There's a difference. But in the exception of Quebec, you have a de Vergers law moment going on with the left nationalists between the Parti Québécois and Quebec Solidaire, where they can't decide who should be the main left opposition. I suspect in the next 10, 15 years, that will solidify, and they will eventually have one left opposition party, and it will go back between that party and the CAQ. Because the other thing that is worth noting in democracies, all democracies, by the way, this is not first past the post centric, is about one party will usually win 2/3 of the time. If you remember some of my videos on democratic revolutions and some of my Understanding Politics series, that's what happens. You have 80 to 90 year time periods where one party will win about 70% of the time. That's the CAQ in Quebec right now. They're going to win about 70% of the time. And eventually the left opposition will solidify around some nationalist party, and then they will start winning again. And when that happens, then they'll probably win about 70% of the time. Well, it'll take a bit. But that's how this works. You don't have a situation. What the Vergers law is telling you isn't that there is only ever two parties. To have such a system where there can only be two parties requires other elements on it. Those elements in the US, for example, that create such a robust system are the presidency and Senate elections. That is one of the things that creates them. The Senate elections are one seat, one candidate. The president is one seat, one candidate. If you cannot win a statewide race, you're irrelevant in the US, nationally. Whereas in Canada, all you need to do is be able to win 30,000 votes, and you can get a seat in Parliament. So the standard is a lot lower. So you will see what happens in these systems more frequently. And that is a challenge party. And we do actually see these occasionally in the US, just very rarely. You saw one in the 90s with Ross Perot. Challenged the Republicans as a splinter. Got 18% of the vote. Quite substantial. You see this happen time and again. Whereas in a US-style system, that will fizzle out very quickly, or they will win very quickly, as how the Republican Party took over from the Whigs very quickly. But in a parliamentary system, this can burn and smolder and fade over decades. The NDP's first big shot at crushing the Liberals came in 1988. Following that election, they were nearly tied with the Liberals in seats. They were doing, not nearly tied, my mistake. But the Liberals had taken a huge, or was it 84? Sorry, yeah, it was 1984. Apologies. They had nearly tied with the Liberals in seats, 40 to 30. Popular vote, the Liberals were only up 9. They had a shot in 1988 to reestablish themselves, but they fumbled it for various reasons. And then in 1993, they collapsed, getting only 7% of the vote. Then they had a second chance in 2008 and 2011 and would have been 2015 under Layton, where he built the NDP up as the Liberals were slowly imploding, culminating in a NDP second place performance in 2011. And you could argue first place polling in a lot of 2015, but since Layton had died and was replaced by Mulcair, who did not have a lot of Layton's qualities, he could not carry it across the finish line. In a lot of ways, that's kind of the story of party replacement. Party replacement is based and built on one person, or maybe a small handful of people. The only other way it works is if you have the opposite, and you have just woeful incompetence time and again from the party that's being replaced. But as long as you have tolerable people in charge of the party being replaced, you need very competent, long-lasting vision, or else your party will fizzle out in first past the post. Just like how the Greens, when May stepped down, looked like they might fizzle out. Now that she's back, they might survive. We'll see going into 2025, where that will go. But we have this dichotomy. The NDP kind of blew their shot, and now the Liberals will get a shot to see if they can cripple the NDP again. Can Trudeau do what Chrétien failed to do? Maybe. And I think there's a reason to believe that now might be different. Now, sure, even if the NDP lose 7 more seats, they're still probably going to be in a better vote share position than they were in 1993. But since they do not get per vote subsidy anymore, that's going to hurt them significantly. And they've alienated a lot of their base. Their fundraising is abysmal. And their main base seems to be moving to urbanite, university-educated people, and to a lesser extent, the urban poor. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong supporting being based in either demographic, but the problem with being based in either demographic is the urban poor don't really have any money to give you. By definition, they're poor. And university-educated voters, when they're students, have no money, so they can't give you anything. And usually, if they start making money in the field, they will usually become either more liberal or more conservative. It's not impossible, but usually very rare for someone who is financially well off to vote for social democratic parties. The base for those people is usually poor. Usually very populist as well, left-wing populist. But the risk by catering to those in Canada as a third party that's performing anemically is they don't have fundraising to give you. So it can be very hard to run a party apparatus. It's hard to run ads. It's hard to do campaigning. It's hard to do anything because you have no money. And the story of the NDP, since Singh's took over, is they don't have money to do what they want to do. That's why you see him doing low-cost, low-utility things such as TikTok. That isn't a strategy for someone who actually wants to win. The reality is most people who use something like TikTok are very young, so they were already predisposed to be NDP voters, so you're not gaining new voters by doing this. But also, they're usually very low propensity voters. They might be very politically active, but being politically active does not make you a high propensity voter. That's kind of the thing with the PPC. I think some of the polls in 2021 that had them at like 9-10% weren't wrong. But it's 9-10% of a lot of low propensity voters. They weren't going to turn out for them. They just don't vote. They don't believe in voting. I don't think it does anything. As I said before, and I will say again now, democracy is entirely a faith-based system. Democracy does not exist unless you believe it exists. And a lot of voters on the populist left and the populist right don't believe democracy works. So they don't vote because they don't believe in it. It's a fundamental worldview. And that's kind of where we are with the NDP. Singh is catering to a bunch of low propensity voters, and by doing so is alienating core old school NDP voter groups, the unionized workers, specifically unionized private sectors, people like the trades. He's alienating them. Because the thing with tradespeople and a lot of private sector union workers, including manufacturing workers, is they're usually socially conservative. And they are often fairly, like, the best way to phrase this, they can often be very populist, but they diverge on economics, and they're usually socially conservative. So what the latent style NDPers could do for success is they could appeal to those kind of voters for donations, for votes, for volunteers, by being populist, by being center-left on economics, not wildly radically left-wing, not right-wing, but center-left, and not really touching social issues. Not focusing on them. They weren't a big deal. When the NDP was doing best, they were a populist left-wing party. That's why back in its early days, it dominated so well in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and did well in Alberta. Now it does mediocre on all three on the federal level. It does poorly in Saskatchewan on the provincial level. It's only being carried in Alberta provincially by Notley continuing the old style of NDP leadership, and when she finally resigns, either because she finally gets too old or she loses yet another election and is forced out, you're going to probably see the same trend occur. We might even see the same thing happen in Manitoba this year, where the NDP fumble the election they should win because of this. Though Manitoba is easier for this style of NDP to work in because it's more urbanized in a way than Alberta is, or more usefully urbanized. But that's where we are with the NDP. The party seems to be approaching its last legs under this system. If Singh resigns and they can find the right leader, they could salvage the party. It's not too late by any means. But if Singh or someone like Singh carries the party into 2029 or 2027 or what it is, 2 more elections, I don't think the NDP will survive. His style of politics is too divisive, alienates too much of the core traditional NDP base, and it doesn't yield anything. They've been excessively unsuccessful since Singh. But with that, I'll wrap up the video here. If you liked it, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below. Let me know if you think I missed anything, if you think I went over too much detail on something. I don't know. Let me know. I will see you hopefully next week with something different. I have some thoughts, but I will not spoil, because it usually gets harder to make something once you tell people you're going to do it. But with that, I bid you adieu.